Welcome to Unmasking Social, where we talk about building real friendships and meaningful connections without masking who we truly are. I'm your host, Sharon Baum, a speech and language pathologist with an expertise in social thinking and how it relates to autism and ADHD, specifically with our teens and tweens. Let's dive in. Hello. Today we hear from a big change maker in the social world, Nancy Tarshis, someone who has dedicated her life to helping others understand social, not just our autistic and twice exceptional students, making sure that she always looks beyond the diagnosis, paying attention to exactly what the individual needs in terms of support and accommodations, but also teaching schools nationwide so that they can be equipped to handle social. All right, everybody, welcome back to Unmasking Social. I'm your host, Sharon Baum. Today we have the esteemed Nancy Tarshis, who has done groundbreaking work in not only the autistic community, but in the twice exceptional community. Thank you so much, Nancy, for being with us today.
Happy to be here.
Also, I'm just curious, in terms of your journey in becoming a speech and language pathologist, fellow speech SLP, what was that journey like in terms of where it started and where you're at now?
Well, it's a long journey.
We have time.
Okay. Well, I was a teacher of the deaf, and that's really where I started. I started as a special educator. And I always like to say that because I feel that as an SLP, having sat on both sides of that IEP table or all three sides of that table as the SLP, as the special educator, as the administrator. I've sat in so many places that I feel like it makes me uniquely able to see perspectives. So I started as a teacher of the deaf. I will not take you through the ins and outs of my family's financial situation, but I had a kid and I stopped teaching. And then I needed to go back to work. And so I called my old boss and I asked for a job, and it was September. How crazy is that? And he said, "It's crazy that you're actually calling me because I had a teacher quit yesterday."
Wow.
So the job was not teacher of the deaf. It was what they called then teacher of communication disorders. I worked for BOCES.
Oh, Westchester, yes. Okay.
So in order to be able to do that, I needed a waiver from the state education department. So my boss drove me to Albany and we got a waiver saying I could teach the year without the credential, but within a year, I had to go back and get the 6 credits that would give me the TSSLD.
Yes. The TSSLD, which I have, but I don't have the teacher of the deaf, but that allows, for those who are listening, who are professionals, right, that allows us to work in the schools because now we're considered teacher of the speech and language disabilities. Yes.
Right. So I taught the year. I went to Columbia, which is where I got my first master's, went to the speech department to talk to the chair about getting these 6 credits. And he said, "Hang on a second." And he grabbed my transcript because he knew I had been there before. And he looked at my transcript and he said, "You don't want to be a teacher, do you?" And he said, "If you wanted to be a teacher, you'd have stayed teaching after you had your kid." Anyway, he coerced me into going for the whole master's in speech.
And back then, I feel like master's in speech wasn't even required. Or was it?
No, but it wasn't required to be in the schools. But he kind of knew that in the schools was not where my heart was at that
right.
point. Mm-hmm. And just to give my husband a shout out, I went home and said to him, "I know we're in the worst debt of our whole lives," which is why I had to go back to work. "But I really feel like I should get this degree."
Wow.
And he said, "We'll make it work."
That's amazing. But that's also so courageous.
You got to follow your heart sometimes. Look, I am privileged enough and I had a safety net and a working spouse, and we tightened our belts and I went back to grad school and So after grad school, I started working at Einstein College of Medicine at their outpatient developmental clinic. That was my last placement as a grad student, and they hired me. And I worked for a few years, and then Columbia pulled me back and said, you should come get a PhD. So I went part-time at Einstein and I started my PhD program. I did all of the coursework and was studying for the certification exam when Einstein offered me the chief of service.
Ooh,
And
tough decision.
It wasn't, because I'm a clinician at heart. I love to teach, but I'm a clinician at heart. And I knew that I never wanted to give that up. So I didn't feel like I needed the full PhD to be able to teach. I really knew that there are a lot of adjuncts out there, and there are a lot of people out there teaching a course here and there who don't have that. So I went back to Einstein full-time and was the director of service. And it's through that I started in early intervention, and I was among a small group this is when the early intervention law began. So it was way back in the early 90s when Part H became law and EI became funded through initially the Department of Health.
Yeah.
And so I was on the EI team. And that EI team, we were kind of just at the beginning of the wave of individuals who were being diagnosed with autism. And Einstein became known as a place where you could get a diagnosis of autism under 2 years old, which at that time was highly unusual, first of all, in any population, and especially unusual in the population we served in the Bronx, because I'm sure you're aware that disparities in healthcare, the age of diagnosis at that point for children of color and for individuals from less privileged backgrounds was much older.
Yes.
Yeah.
Even
So
now, sometimes.
we developed this expertise in young children. And so that's kind of where my interest kind of started. And then over time, these 2-year-olds became 3, 4, 6.
Yeah.
And it was the head of the team at that point. And we were the early intervention team who suddenly were the early intervention team and what we called the Relate program. So we were still seeing a lot of the littles, but then we were also seeing all of the kids who are coming in with a primary complaint, if you will, from parents of social challenges, like with a primary social difference is what I would say. That was why the parents were coming.
So that was basically the first time that in mass you noticed parents coming with these social communication challenges about this concern about their children.
It started with my kid isn't doing what other kids are doing. And then when we got a name and they wrote us up in the Wall Street Journal, and then we started getting people from Hong Kong, from India, from all these places looking for a diagnosis. And it went from seeing an occasional child with autism to seeing lots and lots. And even more strange, seeing kids where parents were coming and saying, I think my kid's autistic. And we were saying, no, they're not.
Other end. Right. Because there is a difference between social communication challenge and autism.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then
people,
you don't have to be autistic to have a social learning difference. So because I was at Einstein for, I don't even know anymore.
I think it was 27 years, according to LinkedIn.
7 years.
Yeah. Sorry. I'm not a stalker. I promise.
For 27 years, I saw so many waves and differences. Then I got to social thinking because the developmental pediatricians saw 3 boys in 1 2-week period, all of whom had social differences. Interestingly, one of them had what was then called Asperger's. One of them had probably one of the more severe cases of ADHD that I had ever seen. One of the most affected, inattentive, hyperactive kids I'd ever worked with. And one of them had mental health challenges, but they were all presenting with some pretty significant social differences. And so the pediatrician came to me and said, I need you to form a social group, boys. And I said, well, I don't really see 10-year-olds. She said, you do now.
That's how it happens sometimes, right?
Right. And I had a really, really gifted graduate student at that time, just smart and gifted. And we did our first session and they were tearing up the room. And we were doing kind of a structured social skills approach because that's what we knew. And I looked at her and said, yeah, no, this isn't working. They're too smart. They're too capable. They don't need what we're doing. We have to do something. And it was her. She went home. She was much more computer savvy than I was at that point.
They always are.
Right. And she went home and she did research and she came back and she said, look at this. And she goes onto my computer and this really funny little website that had hardly anything on it popped up, and it was Michelle Garcia Winner, and her first 2 books were on the website. 2. And we kind of read through the stuff that was there, and I said, well, this makes sense. And I ordered the book with rush postage, and the books came, we devoured them, and we started working with these kids.
Wow. So that was your evolution. That was your moment in time where that's it, right? Where the social group started.
Right.
And then the rest is history, but there's a long after.
Well, there's one more piece of that, which is that incredibly smart, capable, talented graduate student was the woman who was involved in the very first team to start the ASD Nest program at the Board of Ed, because she was on a Board of Ed scholarship. And so she started to work for me, but then the Board of Ed called her back and said, nope, you got to fulfill it. They gave her a deferment, and then they said, never mind. And she had to start working right away.
And so she was one of the...
She's the architect of SDI. Susan Brennan.
Susan Brennan.
Ellerman
Brennan.
No,
my, right. So I'm very familiar because I worked in the Nest program for so many years, which is how we overlapped and we found each other. But for those who are listening, the Nest program is a very collaborative program in New York City that's housed in the Department of Education that uses a lot of Michelle Garcia Winner's work, which you were using in the very beginning, which is all about social thinking and trying to accommodate the needs of the student, getting into the mind of the students, thinking about the interests and the strengths of the student rather than telling the student, do this or do that. It's not about the behavioral change. It's about accommodating and thinking about what they're thinking so that you can collaborate on where to go next. You're the we think teacher. So did I explain that effectively?
Well, we thinkers. I began running groups. I ran groups at Einstein. I also started a private practice with a colleague, because what was happening was parents were coming to the clinic from New York City, and we were offering them social thinking groups in the Bronx. And they were saying, we can't. It's too far to travel. We can't do that every week. Is there anybody in New York City running social thinking groups? And at that point, there wasn't. This is a long time ago. This was 2008.
Wow. And it's so shocking to me just because social is so important in general that I would think that there would be like a social group in general. Like it sounds like there was
lots of social skills groups. There were not
which is so different
thinking groups. So when we started our first groups, what we were routinely told by parents after either at the intake or after a few weeks. And intake, they said, I'm not sure I can even get my kid to come. And we would say, well, have them come and meet us. Let's see. But why? Well, the last social group we brought our kid to, there were a lot of kids. They didn't look like my kid. And our daughter or our son would walk out of the group and say, you think I look like them? Because the groups were not matched for social function. So there were kids who were not so verbal or with some cognitive challenges, or kids who were highly verbal and cognitive. They were not well matched for cognition, for social radar, for kind of temperamental qualities, if you will. And they were huge. They were, 8, 10, 12 kids.
Yeah. Right. And so that's hard because one of the big things about social thinking groups is that I found is that you want to have well-matched students if you can, right? Because they serve as peer models for each other. And age isn't always the determining factor because social isn't necessarily occurring with age, especially based on exposure, right? So that's how you ended up starting the private piece, the private program.
So up until June, I have still been running social thinking groups.
That's amazing.
As of June, I'm not running groups anymore. But
June was the end?
June was my last group. Now I am just doing individual.
Right. I can imagine that maybe you need a break, but who knows? Maybe you'll go back. And that one never really knows. But
yeah.
But I wanted to touch upon also another area that also and it intertwines this twice exceptional group of people, right? And I've seen it and you've seen it a lot. And you put in a lot of work for this group. And sometimes I find myself almost confused myself because sometimes the profile looks a little similar to the autistic individual because of the social communication challenge and the intellectual level. And sometimes it make it even more confusing. They co-occur at the same time. And I know that you were a pivotal part of a school in New York City, the Quad, where you directing on this twice exceptional population. So what would you say about this twice exceptional population, especially when it intersects with autism? Or even when it stands alone?
So the first thing I would say is very rare that I look at a diagnosis, meaning at a person as a diagnosis.
Yes.
Right? Because I'm much more interested in how does this person process information? How does this person learn? What is this person interested in? What motivates this human, and what's getting in their way of achieving goals? And when I say achieving goals, I'm not talking about mom and dad's goals, really. I'm not talking about the school's goals always. I'm really thinking about the individual.
Their agency. Yeah.
I worked with the clinical staff up and down the ages, K to 12, but the program I was involved in creating is the K-1-2 program. And I can say that even kindergartners can tell you a goal. You can't say to them, what's your goal? Because they couldn't tell you. But if you said to them, what would make you feel happier at school? What would make school easier for you? What would you like to learn about or do at school? They've got a laundry list. And from there, goals can be derived. And from there, oh, wait, you'd like someone to ask you to play at recess? Great. Let's talk about how we can make that happen. Why do people ask other people to play? What are other people playing? What do you want to play? How do you know what somebody else wants to play? How do you tell them what you want to play? Like, those are all things we can talk about and work on.
Yeah. Yeah. It's giving back the autonomy because when it comes to social thinking, it's all about strengths and interests. And we're operating from a neuroaffirming lens rather than, oh, how are we going to get you to fit in with everybody else? What do you want to do? Right. And it's so interesting because I never asked a kindergartner that question. That hasn't been my area of expertise, but it's so fascinating that if you actually ask them, what do you feel like you need to do? Or what do you want to do? they will answer you and they will create a goal for themselves, social goals. Because we're creating them. We're scripting goals a lot. I know I'm going off on a tangent, but we're creating goals a lot for others based on our own observations, formal assessments, which formal assessments are so difficult because social is hardly ever formal, right? It's a moving target. So it's like almost like we need them to inform us a little bit more.
Totally. And I came to social thinking having had 20 years of experience prior to that with all different ages. I mean, my first teaching job as a teacher of the deaf, I was working with a high school. So I've done sort of all up and down the ages and with people of all different kinds and learning styles and processing. And I think that really helped me to be able to kind of think about and really look at the person in front of me. Really, really look at the person in front of me and think about what are this person's strengths? How can I motivate this person to do things that are hard? To learn things that are less than interesting. That's particularly challenging with the 2E population, to work on what's hard. When you're a 2E child, very often you get a lot of feedback for being smart because that other E can be something that separates you from other people in certain ways. And so for parents, that can be very challenging, and grandparents and friends and neighbors. And so what they can praise the child for is being smart. You're so smart. You're so smart. And they begin to develop their self-esteem and their identity exactly around being smart. And so when they get to school, say, or when they bump up against something that is not easy to learn, well, they haven't had as much practice to begin with learning something that's challenging, and not being able to do something flies in the face of their identity. So that's really hard.
It's tough. It's so hard because also I find that that's like the overlap with the autistic individuals that we happen to have served with the social communication, the old school Asperger's, that's now individuals with autism with social communication challenges, where some of them also are told, and some of them aren't because they're not even recognized for their intelligence, but also are told, you're really smart. You're really smart. You're really smart. You have this interest. You're really smart. And they're not recognized for necessarily their fixed interests, which are really their passions, right? And so it kind of goes ignored. And that's why it's so great that you're not really focusing on the diagnosis itself, because some of these profiles can look similar, but you're still addressing it in a similar way if that's what needs to be done. But the middle school years, because a lot of teens and tweens are listening right now, and can be quite difficult for many. I mean, I was an awkward teen and tween. I don't even remember having a social group. I just had friends. I don't know. They weren't friends with each other, but that was my experience. But the social emotional piece, this draining social emotional piece mixed in with the difficulty with social communication. Was there anything that you learned along the way that helped the 2E and the autistic populations and that are still serving them well in terms of developing not only their social abilities, but also their social emotional abilities that sometimes they're not being guided by?
First of all, nobody in the history of the world ever said, gee, I wish I could go back to middle school. Middle school is a terrible time, and it's a terrible time because of hormones. It's a terrible time because of changing bodies. It's a terrible time because peers are becoming ever so much more important, and peer opinions and behavior. And so it starts with really kind of having an understanding of that. And I think for me, the work I've always done with my middle school students, and I have several currently on my caseload, and the work I've always done is let's talk about what you like about you. And really working on self-esteem, working on using what's special and different and likable about them to help them to find their people, to develop a sense of confidence, but also do some very concrete teaching about how do you be an observer? How do you look at a social situation and decide what to do? If your goal is to be part of the group, then you have to look at the group and see what's happening and decide how that fits with how you see yourself. And you have choices.
Yeah.
You can advocate. And that's a lot of the work I do with middle schoolers and high schoolers and my young adults. The difference between advocating and tolerating. Every one of us, no matter who we are, has things that we like or don't like. I have extreme sensitivity to perfume. I get an immediate migraine when I encounter certain very strong perfume.
It's good we're not sitting next to each other because I actually have, like us, very scented perfume on. But yeah.
But I've had to learn to decide, is this a situation? Do I know this person well enough? Is this a situation where I can say, you know what? I'm really sorry. I'm going to move my seat because X, or I will say to someone I really like, and we're making a plan to get together again. I will decide, do I say, listen, I know I'm really sorry, but I get really bad headaches from certain perfumes. It seems that I'm sensitive to your perfume. Would you be comfortable not wearing it? I've rarely had a person who has, when it's said in a it's me, not you kind of way, but it is, people are very nice about it. Really, really nice about it. I've had people agree to switch airline seats with me. And
That's a big one.
yeah, well, I'm also the person who switches seats with the grumpy person sitting next to a toddler, where I will give them my aisle seat and sit inside next to a toddler so that poor mother doesn't have to have somebody glaring at them. Well, Wainwright.
That's awfully flexible of you, Nancy.
That's the advocate versus tolerate, right?
Tolerate. I like that. The difference. Yeah.
That I have to advocate for. And so it's pay it forward, right?
Yeah. I mean, if we have to practice what we preach, right? We're going to advocate too. But what's interesting, and I've noticed a pattern, not just on this podcast, but especially on this podcast, where I almost feel like we're holding our autistic and 2E teens and tweens and young adults to almost a higher standard, because I'm allowed to say to you, hey, Nancy, your perfume is bothering me a little bit. Can you maybe not do that? But then sometimes when people aren't trained, which that's going to be the next phase of this podcast with you in terms of training people, sometimes it's almost like, no, just try to like adapt more, try to be flexible more. And the flexibility is important, right? Because we want to teach flexibility. It's important to shift context. But if other people are allowed to express their likes and dislikes and what could be setting them off, why can't someone, an autistic teen and tween who has the words, has the language, say, I hum sometimes when I get nervous, and I know that might annoy you, but it's something that I need to do because it soothes me.
My feeling about that is it's the same but different in what I was talking about. There are plenty of situations where I popped a couple Advil and kept my mouth shut.
Right.
And that's the advocate versus tolerate part of this conversation. It's let's look at some situations and let's talk about what are the variables. And the variables are the situation. Where am I? Who are the people? And what's happening? And then I would add in, what's my plan? And what's my goal? And what's the plan of the group? And once we've kind of looked at those variables, then we can decide what makes sense to advocate for and what makes sense to tolerate.
Right.
Well, a certain part of, say, the school day, that's, I think, something a child or a person can advocate for during a test or silent reading. Those are times when it may make more sense for that student to have a different learning spot because
Accommodation. Mhm.
an accommodation, exactly, because there are probably more people who are going to be thrown off by the humming than the one person. So it's a balance. Teaching our students to learn how to be comfortable with discomfort, to advocate when they need to, tolerate when they must. Those are really important lessons. And I would argue that that's an important lesson for every kid
All of us.
in every school.
And even as an adult, like sometimes I wonder, okay, do I really have to call attention to this? I'm uncomfortable about it. But again, sitting with discomfort's a part of life, right? Or do I have to also speak up about this, like even on the airplane, right? Like, I don't know. Sometimes I'm like, I can handle it. You know what I mean? But then sometimes it's like really like, I feel like egregious. I'm like, oh, okay. You know what I mean? But we all have a different meter that we're running by, which is the same thing with the autistic and TUI population that I've seen. But you touched upon something very interesting, which is tolerance versus advocacy, which is what can I tolerate? And I think that's also something that people are still kind of learning how to work on with their students, right? Because we don't necessarily take an inventory in the beginning when we work with our students of what can you tolerate, what can't you tolerate, right?
No,
We just observe it.
emerges. And
Right.
it emerges over time.
Yeah. But again, advocating for even accommodations is a big advocacy tool because, like you said, the humming may not be something that they can tolerate without right now. Maybe in 6 months from now, they can work on it as they work with various support people. But that means that they're really also advocating for accommodation, which, Nancy, we've come a long way, right? We have, right? I mean, you've
Yeah,
observed it.
100%.
I mean, where there is inclusion a lot more, there is accommodations, there are things like the Nest program, right? There are things like that. But then I also hear from many parents that the accommodations aren't being put in place. I feel like I don't know what to do next with the transition. And like, what are your thoughts about just having accommodations in place, especially when some students don't even have parents who know how to speak up? How do they all find their voice?
Well, honestly, I think it is the role of the intervener. I do. And the teacher. The clinical staff can only do so much. And I think it is the role of the teacher as well to work on this idea of self-advocacy, self-knowledge, self-advocacy, identity. Now more than ever, we're not going to get political. I think that makes sense. But now more than ever, we need students to be able to understand who they are, where they're from, what that means, and also what's different about them, but what's also the same about everyone. Because we ought not to be defined by our differences, because I have a feeling that's how we ended up where we are. And so, what I love about social thinking is it's about perspective. It's about understanding ourselves. It's about understanding others and really listening. I think that's really important. This summer, my colleagues, Ryan Hendricks and Carrie Palmer and I have been working on a project.
Ooh, you told me about a project, but you didn't tell me what it was.
Well, we are piloting a tier 1, 6 lessons for the start of school, K to 6. And we created 6 lessons, K to 6th grade, that will be done in every K to 6 classroom in the Minnetonka Public Schools. That's both in their dual language programs and their English language program. And then it's also being piloted at the Neighborhood Charter School of Harlem. And
I'm familiar. Yeah.
And I can't name it yet, but there's one other possible school that will be joining in to do this. And it's 6 lessons. And it's, again, tier 1, start of the school year, week 1, starting with the littles and working all the way up through 6th grade, teaching about major social thinking concepts for the tier 1 population, because we believe that good social knowledge serves everyone.
It serves everyone. I feel like I learned so much about myself through social thinking and just about how I interact with other people. And just sometimes I check myself and I'm like, uh-oh, I'm not doing a good job at perspective taking. Or maybe I should
We
be
all
advocating.
fall short on that sometimes. That's how social mistakes happen, right?
Right. Communication breakdowns or jumping to conclusions. I mean, we all do these things, right? And it's just so crazy how this is so life-changing for everybody. And that's why I'm so happy because you wouldn't tell me what the project was before, but that's okay. But anyway, but now it's breaking news. But basically, I just feel like this is so great because it's also in the beginning of the year. And I always found that my students, I don't know about you, but the beginning of the year was so tough because it's tough for everybody. I used to get anxiety going back to school because I remember the summer, I was doing different things, but the back to school would start like with the sales, I don't know, at the end of July already. And I'm like, oh my God, it's August. Oh my God. And then it's just like that natural feeling of just anxiety of like, oh my God, back to school. And now you're building a structure for both the autistic and non-autistic population where everybody can figure out about how to transition back. Because I think transitioning is still such a big thing, but I still feel like I really would be wealthy for every penny that I can accumulate for every parent that says to me, I don't know how they're going to transition. I don't know how they're going to transition to the next year. I don't know how they're going to transition to high school. So we are falling short still a little bit, not to be on the negative side.
Well, look, I mean, we are falling short. I don't disagree, but we're also dealing with a world that is changing so rapidly.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Rapidly that it's a little bit hard to keep up. And
hard.
somehow standing in front of the classroom with the golden rule and expecting every kid to understand what that means is not cutting it anymore. And having a list of classroom rules is also not cutting it, because the thing about classroom rules is they're rules. Right? The thing about social thinking is it's tools.
Oh,
It's a tool.
right.
It's not a rule. And that's where I think we all know that there have been a lot of social interventions, if you will, or social teaching that has gotten a bad name among people who feel that teaching people social is not neurodiverse friendly. But my feeling is, if that's the case, then you're probably teaching rules. And I don't teach rules. How could I teach a rule? First of all, so many of the people I work with are young teenage males. And it's fairly obvious, I think, I'm not a young teenage male. So I couldn't begin to tell them how to behave in their milieu. What I can arm them with are a set of observational tools and understandings that they can use in their own environment. Very different.
It's so true because even the teens and tweens that I've worked with and continue to work with, again, I'm not a teen, I'm not a tween, I'm not a young adult. I mean, adulting is hard. So, I mean, I don't want to go back to middle school, but maybe I'd go back to, I don't know, a little bit past high school. But like, yeah, like I can't get even into the female mind and body either. And as much as I'd like to take their perspective and see where they're coming from, there is a limitation on it. So I do see where you're coming from, where it's tools, not rules, right? But still, rules are still obviously being used across schools. Well, I rhyme, tools, rules, schools. But, right?
Yeah, well, there are some, look, any curriculum, any teaching, any intervention, any program, you choose the word, is only as good as the person who is doing the work. And if you are not challenging yourself as a clinician, teacher, educator, parent, whatever it is, to grow and change and learn from the person in front of you, then you're not doing, in my mind, what you should be. I've learned so much from the people I work with and from their parents, and it has so helped me grow as a clinician.
Same here, honestly, amongst other populations too. But this specific population and just the community and the identity that's formed from it over the years, I honestly, it's like what you were saying, being put in the right place. I felt like I was being put in the right place at the right time. I didn't even know what Nest was. I didn't even know what was going on. But it's like all these years later and I can't get away from it. I just want to just continue. It's just, and everybody I speak to on and off this podcast feels the same way. I feel like we have a very passionate, loving community who wants to keep learning from the people that they work with. And I don't believe that's true for everyone, every community, but I do feel like maybe they can learn from ours. And speaking of community, you stress that about finding identity, finding community. And so many teens and tweens, like you said, the 2 ears, I just added the earth, the 2 E's, they actually struggle because, the intelligence, right? Oh, you're so smart. And then what else happens when things go wrong? And then for our autistic individuals, right? Teens and tweens also, and they're struggling to fit in and find community. And the parents are also thinking, what's going on? Why are they not finding their tribe, right? And you know where this is going. So, I mean, it's a tough time, right? Because there's so much going on, but sometimes fitting in comes at a cost because sometimes I've observed so many like being bullied, unfortunately, because they don't recognize what it even means because they feel like a friendship could just be interacting with somebody, even if they're taking advantage of you because of the vulnerability. So for those that are really struggling to fit in, whether they're 2E or autistic or just in general, like going through this time of social communication challenge, what would you say or what advice would you give?
I'd give the same advice to parents all the time, first of all, which is make sure your child spends part of every week doing what they love. When a child has a learning challenge or difference, depending upon the degree to which it impacts them in the school setting, they could spend a lot of time working on what's hard.
Right.
The school day is designed around whatever it is. And then after school, they go to speech, they go to social group, they go to OT. And my feeling is, what does your child love? Your child loves to cook, find a cooking class. Your child likes getting dirty, find a play or science. Or your child loves superheroes, find a superhero program. I mean, nowadays, there's so many possibilities. Or get a good babysitter. I have a number of kids that I worked with who were sort of 8, 9, 10. And then I had some teenagers, some I was working with, but some also were just kids I knew in the neighborhood or whatever. And I would say to them, would you run a Dungeons and Dragons group at my office? Would you do, and I would pay them a certain amount of money so I could oversee it. But it's just important, like a babysitter, you know what I mean? But a babysitter with an shared interest.
Yeah.
Kids have to be able to spend time every week in what they love and what they're good at. They can't be working on what's hard 24/7.
No, and that drains them, brain drain, right? And then
it's a way to find their people also.
Yeah.
I remember one kid that I had in my private practice, and he was a chess kid. And he started playing chess, and then he started going to tournaments, and then he joined the chess club at school, and he found no friends. And then suddenly he joined the chess club and he had a friend. It was someone who shared his passion. How do you and I choose our friends? Well, some of them are historical friends, right? Of course. But then so many of my friends that I have made as an adult have been started out as work people who were in similar fields or interested in what I'm interested in, or
Very true.
So
shared values, right? Shared goals. Like, yeah, that's like a big thing. It's true. And even like you go to a gym class, let's say, and you make a friend, right? Because both of you like going to the gym. So I find that I think because of, like you said, there's so much coming at us every day. And I feel like everything's so fast paced, especially in big cities like where we live, that sometimes maybe it's hard for the parents to prioritize that, right, at the end of the day. But I feel like it needs to be prioritized. It must be prioritized so that they can develop social and maybe understand better who they fit in with so that they don't face that vulnerable taking advantage of, which I've watched, I've observed, I've intervened, and it's awful. But on the flip side, it can be great.
Believer in a great teenage babysitter. If parents can tolerate sort of all the stuff that goes with that, finding a great teenage babysitter can be so good for a tween who's struggling to find their way.
And when you say babysitting, it's not just like literally babysitting a child, right? It could be also babysitting a program like Dungeons and Dragons, right? And they get paid. And it's so interesting because there's a parent I know who has autistic children, and she actually has been motivated to even take friends of her children who are also on this either autistic, ADHD, maybe ADHD, and employ them a little bit by just giving them tasks to oversee certain things that she's doing for her company. So it's right. True, like some role, right? Some role. That's really a good rule of thumb to think about teenage babysitting.
Well, I just think they have their own way of looking at things, and I could, but exposing kids to teen culture and kid culture, helping them, if they're interested, to be part of what other kids are thinking about and reading and doing. It's pretty hard for us to stay on top of all of that as adults.
But as you mentioned, if they're interested, because I know that a lot of times, and the title of this podcast is Unmasking Social, I've spoken about this, we almost want everyone to take their mask off all the time. But I don't take my mask off all the time. I mean, right now I'm actually really tired, for example. But like, you may not detect that because I'm putting on a mask, right? But I'm just saying that, but then we expect everybody to show up authentically as themselves when we ourselves have to unfortunately shift and kind of ignore certain things that are impacting us. And so what are your thoughts on that, on showing up authentically as yourself, but when you feel like it, truly?
It's very complicated because school environments are not designed for anyone in their way to show up as their authentic self, right?
Yeah.
I don't think there's a single teenager who would choose to show up at 8 o'clock in the morning and sit in a seat for the next 7 hours, right?
And look excited, right?
One. Two, you and I are not generalists. I mean, I don't know about your other areas, but you're an expert in social communication and language and speech.
Yeah.
I have my areas and I have other things that I'm good at. There are lots of things I'm not good at, like math, for instance.
Oh, me too.
So we have expectations that kids are generalists. So I bring that up because the whole, it sounds like it doesn't fit with the masking question, but it does in the sense that we are all asked in our lives, some of us more than others. I don't mean to equate any one person's situation with another.
Of course.
To mask or to participate or to accommodate. And it's answering that question of what's my goal, right? And if my goal is to be my authentic self 24/7, then I'm going to have to know that there will be situations that I might either be uncomfortable myself or make people around me uncomfortable. Or I might have to advocate and increase comfort by giving people a heads up. And everything in between.
So people can maybe like assess it on their own as they get older, right? Meaning might be too hard. I can't really unmask right now. Like I can't show up if it's outside of school, let's say. This is too much for me right now, but this thing might be a little bit better where I can show up like myself.
Right. And this is where I really like to help the people I work with really understand their social battery. understand who they are, understand what fills them up and what wears them down so that they can make some choices where choices are available. They can understand what something will take out of them and maybe make different choices about lunchtime or morning or after school or right. All of those things. The better you understand yourself, the easier it is to make decisions.
Self-awareness is the first step. And I find that in general, like the social battery piece is so huge because people also need to know and become aware of, well, when does my social battery run out? What triggers that? In collaboration, obviously, with the people working with them, but eventually on their own. I think that sometimes just as humans, and like we're talking about how this is applicable to everyone, a lot of people don't really know when their battery runs out. And then suddenly they're exhausted and spend a whole day recuperating because it's been too much for them. It's hard to sometimes connect the dots for many.
Totally. I mean, I've been known to get hangry, partially because I'm not in tune to when I'm hungry or not. I'm not good at that
Me
sometimes.
neither. And I get a lot of flack for that, by the way. I don't know about you, but people around me always say, well, did you eat? Like, why are you eating? I'm like, oh, I'll eat it later. But then that's like the worst time to eat.
Exactly. When I suddenly find myself kind of feeling enraged and I have to check in with myself and say, you didn't eat breakfast this morning. Like,
Maybe that, yeah.
like noon and you haven't had anything to eat yet. That's not smart.
Right.
So again, I think teaching kids to check in with themselves is so important.
Yeah. And not only teaching teens, but teaching the people that work with them. And so I just wanted to circle back for a moment on the We Think, right? And I know that you're collaborating on this project, and that's wonderful with transitioning and will support. Can you speak a little bit about the work that you do at We Think in terms of teaching others and training schools and training programs in terms of the social thinking curriculum and how that's working out?
I'm part of what's called the social thinking. Oh my gosh, it just went out of my head. It's a training collaborative, essentially. And there are a group of us who, when a school is interested in, say, teaching their staff about social thinking, they will reach out to social thinking and say, we're interested. And someone like me or one of my colleagues will go, and it really depends upon what the school is looking for. I've worked with hundreds of schools in all different models. Sometimes it's a one-day professional development, one and done. I go in, this is pre-COVID, 6-hour training. That's it. That's all they want. Sometimes, like I worked with a consortium of schools in Chicago for the last 4 years. They had a grant. So I started by working with a group of self-identified teachers. They put out I don't know what you call it, like we're offering this professional learning community who'd like to participate. And it was 2 hours a month. So 1 hour I did training and 1 hour they were discussion groups, small groups, and talking about the social thinking concepts. First year was the social thinking vocabulary. Second year was the social thinking frameworks. Third year was more individual projects where they were working with their schools and I was mentoring them on what they were doing with social thinking in their school program, because it's kind of a train the trainer type of program. It was for me to work with them for the rest of my life. It was for them to develop the confidence and knowledge base they needed to go out and do it. And in that, I worked with several preschools, 4 different preschools, and then a set of teachers who spanned K to 11 across a whole set of schools. I've been working with the Neighborhood Charter School of Harlem for 11 years. And essentially, I train staff, especially since COVID, there's a lot of turnover. So there's always a new set of staff to train. And then I kind of do co-supervision of the speech pathology staff. clinical problem solving. I work with their director of speech on clinical problem solving ideas. Sometimes they want me to just come in and observe a classroom and make some suggestions about what could be offered in this classroom that would make it smoother for all of the kids. I mean, they're different things, different years.
Right. Which keeps it really exciting in a way, like where it's always changing and evolving, but there's such a need for it because so many people are not trained. I wasn't trained. I just happened to get trained because they told me we're starting a program here and the other person isn't doing it. That's a speech pathologist. So yeah, you're going to be it. And I said, oh, okay. But had I not gone through that, I wouldn't really understand social thinking.
Right. Well, it's interesting because I remember when I first started, I read the book and I started doing it. And I remember so distinctly when I finally did the clinical training at the social thinking clinic in San Jose, which was probably maybe a year-ish into my working with the concepts. I got to the clinic and I thought, I've been doing this all wrong. Like, I was using it like a manualized curriculum. It was such a great learning experience doing that clinical training. And then for about 5 minutes, they offered what they called a traineeship, where you went in and you became the clinician and they observed you, kind of like when you were a graduate student. That was a requirement to become part of the training collaborative. They don't do that anymore, but that was a phenomenal experience to take over Michelle's groups or Pam Crook's groups and run the group with them sitting there or watching through the window and critiquing. I planned them, I implemented them, I wrote them up. So it was such a gift. It was such a great learning experience.
So yeah, you've lived many lives so far to this point, right? Which is incredible, right?
And I'm only 30, right?
Right. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, in 30 years, you've accomplished more than anybody else I know. And so circling back to all of this, it's interesting because you're so student facing still. I mean, as of June, the private, obviously, you're not doing as much.
I'm not
but one to one. Right. You're not doing groups, but you're also educationally faced still, even though there was a point in time that you spoke about where for a moment you said, oh no, do I go back? Well, it was an easy decision for you because you realized you'll be teaching and look at that, right? You ended up fulfilling that and you're teaching. And so it's interesting because I think both are equally important, right? Right. The peer-to-peer and also the teaching and the training, because like you said, there's turnover, new people are coming in and people don't know social thinking until they know social thinking, right?
You can't teach if you don't actively have a caseload. It's not that, I shouldn't say it that way.
I kind of know what you're saying.
We learn so much from doing the work. The way I teach about it has evolved as I have evolved, as my clientele has evolved. So if I stopped seeing clients, I think it would change the way I teach and not necessarily for the better.
Yeah. And it's interesting because the whole social thinking model, every single person, including Michelle Garcia Winter, is still seeing clients. They're traveling, they're speaking like you, but they're also seeing clients, which I think also separates us a lot because a lot of people become so disconnected when they stop seeing clients. And I even took a pivot myself, but I said, no, I can't stop seeing clients. How am I going to keep up my clinical skills, right? Best practices, things that you can't really I mean, it's really not like riding a bike because if you get back into it, you've lost time building yourself up, I feel like. So I feel that way too. It's like at any pivot, especially with the social thing, social communication, like, I don't know, I'm with you on it. Like you got to keep going with both, right? To really kind of stay afloat, evolve and things. I have one final question for you. As we're talking about evolution and things changing in the world, and without getting too political, there are so many people that are so scared right now for many reasons, right? The autistic population is scared that their identity is being taken away from them in some ways. I've heard many speaking of
even AI. I had a student tell me that AI was going to take over everything and then they're done. And I'm like, I didn't want to tell him this at the time, but I have a fear like that too. And then on top of the layers of that, a lot of parents are losing hope in terms of systems and things that are going on. But you've brought into this conversation a lot of optimism. What are some final optimistic words that you can really give over to the families and the teens and tweens and young adults that are listening about the future? Even though you don't have a crystal ball.
I feel a little bit like Anne Frank, and believe me, I don't class myself in that category of people who've had an impact on the world. But I still believe in the goodness of mankind. I do. I still believe people are inherently good. I think there's more that connects us than separates us. I think that when we teach children what it means to be a good person, to take another person's perspective, to stand in their shoes, to represent themselves the way they want to be represented, to balance me and we, I think we can make a better world. We can make a better place. And it's why I stay in education, because I think there's an assault on education going on in this country, as we know. And without an educated populace,
What do we have? What are we left with?
Not moving in a good direction.
Yeah. But I love what you said about the different, and you mentioned that a couple times throughout this conversation about staying connected. This is all about social connection, right? This is all about identity and communication. And I feel like we all have so much in common. I have so much in common with the students I see. I don't know if you feel that sometimes.
Totally.
I almost question, like, maybe I wasn't given the diagnosis just because we have so much in common, the way we view things, the way we sometimes internalize things. And you're right. Like, I think that's like such a big takeaway. Like, we need to look at each other as we stay social, right? And look at what keeps us together and stays connected. And we can remain connected and not divided like we are right now a little bit. Where can everybody find Nancy Tarshis? Because you have a few different places where people can find you.
The best place to find me is my email.
Your email. Okay.
Yeah. It's just nancy.tarshis@gmail.
Keeping it easy.
Keeping it easy. Sometimes I can be slow. Sometimes there are those glitchy things like I never got your first email.
Yeah.
If I am not responsive to people within a couple of weeks, they should email me again and say, did you get my last email?
Right. I mean, that's a good, by the way, advocacy tool also, right? If someone didn't respond to your email, it could be for a million reasons. We don't know why. So we don't want to make false inferences. So follow up with that.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great. And I just want to put in a quick plug to say coming next spring, for those people who have been using or enjoying the We Thinkers curriculum and storybooks, we have a new book coming out called We Think Sheets, which are think sheets for the younger set, ways making visual, practicing.
Right. And where can those be found?
Social thinking will be on the social thinking website.
And you're going to help create those.
They're done.
Oh, they're done. Oh, you finished it already. Okay. We're past. Okay. That's wonderful.
They're with the illustrators.
Thank you so much, Nancy, for coming on the podcast. You provided so much critical information just on social communication in general, and then just where we are now, how we can support, how we can evolve. I love the whole tools over rules, but rules still have a place. That's something that I'm going to keep thinking about, because sometimes I rerun phrases in my head too. But even just like the way people can get in touch with their students and take it to the next level is just great for everybody listening. So thank you so much for your pearls of wisdom.
It was my pleasure.
Have a great afternoon.
You too.